Hello, I'm Sarah Gristwood and a lifelong addict of Virginia Woolf. As a young teenager, I'd only leave home for a night if I had two books with me. One was The Lord of the Rings, the other was this, Virginia Woolf's A Writer's Diary, and you can see it's now so battered it's held together with elastic bands. Then I discovered her wonderful A Room of One's Own, the book that first taught me about feminism. And many years later, I was lucky enough to write about her myself in this book, in Vita and Virginia, the story of her long relationship with the writer and gardener Vita Sackville West. Their physical passion was brief, their emotional closeness lasted for many years, until Virginia's death. And writing the book maybe taught me several things. Something about both women, of course, but also about the relationship they shared, and shared even with their husbands, who were extraordinarily generous participants in this close bond. You could even say it taught me a little bit about marriage, but certainly something about kindness, and I think the importance of that is something of which we're very aware today. But also, writing the book taught me about both writers' strong sense of place. Now, Vita is associated with two places in particular. The first, of course, is Sissinghurst, the great garden in the Weald of Kent that she made with Harold Nicholson. They found it as abandoned, decayed, almost a rubbish tip. They made it into this extraordinary, innovative garden that hundreds of thousands of us still visit today. And Vita wrote about Virginia visiting her there in the high, rosy tower where Vita did her writing, and the picnic lunch they had. I love that they ate the conventional luxurious foods, salmon, champagne, chocolates. But the other place with which Vita is so associated, a few miles away, is Knowle Park in Kent, the great house, the Elizabethan quasi-palace, where she grew up, but which as a girl she could never inherit. So Virginia gave it back to her. In Virginia's book Orlando, she features a young aristocrat born into the age of Elizabeth I, a male courtier, who magically not only survives 400 years, but becomes a woman without losing his home. And Virginia wrote to Vita saying, "What if Orlando were you? What would you think?" And of course there was only one answer. But Virginia herself too had this extraordinary sense of place, I feel. We all know, of course, we associate her with Bloomsbury, Fitzrovia, where she was one of a group of people who were really trying in the early part of the 20th century to rewrite the rules of how men and women related to each other. But that's far from the only place. Outside London, there was St Ives in Cornwall, where she spent these magical childhood holidays, and that was a world she'd later recreate into the lighthouse. With Leonard, there was Monk's House, down in the country, down this winding lane, where she would create her own garden. But in London too, the spectrum, I discovered, is far broader than we think when we speak about the Bloomsbury group. I discovered that Virginia's street haunting, as she called it, took her all over the city, that she and Leonard had this particular restaurant off old historic pub off Fleet Street where they'd dine. And I discovered too about the near decade she spent in Richmond and where so very much happened, that the Hogarth Press was born there. I mean, how can we forget that? Vita wrote about visiting Virginia there. In her diary, dined with Virginia at Richmond. She says that love makes everyone a bore, but the excitement of life lies in the little moves nearer to people. And perhaps, Vita added, she feels this because she's an experimentalist in humanity and has had no grand passion in her life. I do feel, certainly I felt when I read that we do need to know more, to remember more Virginia's time in Richmond, the importance of it in the life of the Woolfs, of what they achieved. I'd utterly love to support the idea of a statue to commemorate this, and thank you for letting me push it to you today.